Ladies and gentlemen, when I first heard of Tritium, I thought it was a parrot with a speech impediment. But it's not. It's a technology company with a 20-year history of award-winning innovation in e-mobility and renewable energy. Les has a long history in this industry and also generously gives his time to associations like the association that we're part of. Their business is entirely focused on DC fast charging solutions for electric vehicles. So it's a good topic to catch up with today. Tritium means providing energy freedom. It's a big call, isn't it? But if you'd asked Les 2 years ago to get up here and talk to you all about it, he would have gone, I doubt it. But today he's competent, capable, and really looking forward to talking to you. Please welcome Les Smith.
Thanks. Thanks for that. I'm the global head of support for Tritium. So whenever a station breaks, then that's what I'm there to get repaired. So this talk is more from the perspective of support side, not from the sales or other sides. So I'll just go on. So I've got what I do. So my main job is if there's a fault, we have to get to the fault as quickly as possible and get it repaired. Because there's nothing worse than someone turning up to a station and the station's not working. But a part of that is also I take the feedback from customers and then I feed that back to engineers. So our engineers are extremely busy. So most of the time is spent trying to minimize the time I can pull from them, but get the maximum results for customers. So it's a different thing. There's sometimes a lot of translations. Sometimes we get people request a feature, but they don't know how to request it in engineering terms. So I'll change the customer request into actual technical information to request. So over the years, the charging relationships have changed. So as you'll see with this slide, so we have a driver. So a driver will go out and they'll purchase their vehicle, and then they'll wish to charge their vehicle, and that's where things happen. So then you have an owner. So the owner of a charging station, they'll buy their station, but they don't have a way of letting owners know, like drivers know, where their station is or how much their station costs to use. So that's where you have the OCPP services. So someone like ChargeFox, JetCharge, they will all be there to provide that information. So as these things have been coming along, over the years they've been changing. So I think you notice that the NRMA is mainly free right now, but at some point they'll need to change that. And when they do, that's where these services come in. Also these services, at the end, there's one called the monitoring service. So the monitoring service actually becomes quite useful because that's how you know when a charger is overloaded. So like currently, if you, like there's many complaints about the Mittagong charger. If you go there, there's usually a queue. So these systems help provide that information that's required so that you can choose whether to put more stations in or change the behavior of the driver by implementing different tariffs. So for the drivers, we have this thing we call the first time success rate. So that's where you turn up, you plug in your car, and it charges totally without any issues, and then you drive off. So at Tritium, that's what we're always trying to do. We always want that to be the first thing that happens. And this can be a little difficult because the people who design the protocols that sit underneath the chargers, they're done with timers and other things that customers aren't aware of. So you may find like someone will plug in their car, and before they even get started, our charger will flag an error, and that can just be because of a protocol underneath. So we've been trying to do our best to improve those situations, which includes redesigning the fronts of our chargers to be more user-friendly. We also have people skim instructions. So especially for our partners, if they have a billboard up and it's got like a lot of instructions, then we try and ask them to change that, because usually that means nobody will follow them because there's too many. Because it's difficult to like read instructions on one side and actually do it while you're facing away from it into a car on the other. So we're trying to ask people to make things more intuitive, use pictures, use anything that makes it just easy. Make sure you do it for somebody who you think like I would ask my mum to do it, because my mum knows nothing about electric cars. So if she could do it easily, then that is good, because you can't assume that every person who rolls up to your station will know how the station actually operates. Also, there's a lot of complex protocols working underneath. So we find that sometimes when someone rolls up, they're not aware of the different states you can do. So sometimes with the charging station, you can request the person authorize first, then plug into their vehicle, or they can plug into their vehicle and then authorize later. But underneath all that is a whole bunch of timers to send data off to servers, to go collect information, to prepare the station ready for charging. So if you take too long, these things can cause issues that drivers shouldn't need to be aware of. But right now we're still stuck in this position where the people who define those things are not always aware of the implications. So you may find that there's actually a lot of manufacturers now starting to ignore the specifications and extend windows out. So sometimes you can apply like 25 cents per minute, and that will change the behavior of how people use the chargers. So usually if you apply time, people tend to just charge us for the least amount as possible and then race to the next charger. So that way it stays open for more people to use. So next one is vehicles. So vehicles are a funny thing. They change. So even though you bought your car and it's there, through its lifetime, its behavior may change depending on software updates that are applied to it. So they sometimes include like a Tesla Model 3. They went from doing maybe 100 kilowatts to almost 200 kilowatts, and that was just a software update. So this can also change how the station has to apply as well. So one we had was we do the Ionity. We do a number of charges for Ionity network, and you may have seen that all of a sudden Model 3s were dropping off, and it was only after a particular software update, and that software update had actually changed some underlying protocol timers that were incompatible with our station, which meant we had to race out and replace all the software on all the stations to fix the issue. But also Tesla went and they actually made some changes as well. So it's not always it's not like the old time where you had something and it was always the same. It will change and it will keep changing as the time goes through. Also, we have these inlet tolerance problems. So not every socket is the same. So some are a little wider, some are a little more snug. And we've been having issues where, say, like if you go to a 350 kilowatt station, that cable's liquid cooled. It's very heavy. So if you don't press it in and hold it while the car locks it, then it will actually fall out a little bit. And then you will get an error saying like the car has not initialized. So there's a lot of things coming through where they're like, you would think that they would all be the same, but they're not. So unfortunately, this causes a lot of issues that the only way to fix that is through education. So sometimes we will change the display on the front of the charger to indicate, like, please try again, or please press and hold. Sometimes we also rely on our partners to please inform. So if they see like that the lock doesn't occur, and it's always with a particular user, they may send that person an email and say, hey, we think you're not pressing and holding long enough. Also, we have a new issue that's coming up. So this never used to really affect too much for a few years ago, but now it seems to be more in people's mind. they want their car to charge as fast as possible as soon as they plug it in. And that's not always happening, because when cars get hot, they slow themselves down. So we do seem to have more issues now where someone pulls in and like they've plugged in their Jaguar, and instead of it racing through as fast as it can go, it goes slowly, and immediately they'll say, oh, it's the station's fault. But the problem is the car can't tell them, because there's no display on your car that will say, hey, I'm going slower because my battery's hot. So these things are becoming more, they're bubbling up. So maybe in the future your car will tell you this information, but right now this is left to station owners. So we'll see where these go, but we're hoping in the future the car will be able to display more. Also, we've been seeing the battery charge. So now that the size of a battery is getting larger and larger and larger, when the Nissan Leaf 2012 was out, you could plug it in and it would sit there for maybe 3 or 4 minutes as fast as it could go, and then would slowly taper off. And the BMW i3, it was a bit faster. But now if you go and plug like a new Model 3 into a station, it will just ramp straight up to the amperage limit of the cable, and it'll just sit there. It'll sit there for a long time. So these changes are now changing the way people charge. And so you may find that some people will just sit there and they'll just let it go right to the end. And the old rule where you hit 80 and hung up seems to be going away, because as the battery sizes are changing, they stay at the higher rate for much longer than what they used to. So on a 50 kilowatt charger, they may be chewing away at 125 amps right towards the end before it just slowly drops off. Whereas if you had like a Nissan Leaf, it would have dropped off long before the 80% and they would have continued on their way. Stations. So this is the main part. So stations, we have a HMI to convey the status of the station. So this is changing. So when the stations were first being made from Tritium, they just have a little 7-segment display. It doesn't have any ability to really do words. So we can do like a capital E and 2 little R's for error, and a number. And that's all we could do with that display. And a lot of people are like, oh, the driver doesn't know what that display means. And unfortunately, that display wasn't really for the driver. That display was for the owner. And that was meant so that the driver could call and say, hey, I've got an error 22. And then the owner could say, oh yeah, that's okay. You just need to make sure your car's switched off. So now that these things are changing, we're changing too, and now we're getting nice LCD displays on the front now, and they can display a little more graphics and to help customers, so that when they see an error and it's a recoverable error, they can fix themselves, like unplugging or plugging in or checking the status of their car. So we're getting more of that, so that way things are more self-serve and easier to use. Oops, sorry. And the other, I have positioning and cable length. Now this is a funny issue that comes up, is that if you notice that some of our smaller stations have very short cables where the cables don't actually touch the ground. They do a loop and they go into the little handle. And then we have others that have very long cables, and they depend upon where you put the station. So if you drop the station on the nose of the car park bay, then generally you'll have a longer cable, but then that cable drags on the ground, it can actually get run over. There's a lot of issues that can happen. So we have seen more customers putting their stations sideways between 2 bays, and then that way they can swing outwards without dragging on the ground. So unfortunately, due to different manufacturers using So some have put the inlet on the nose, some on the back quarter, some on the forequarter. That's caused a lot of issues, especially if you've got short cables and they're on the front. The other one we've got is fault recovery. So stations are quite complex and they can take quite a lot to repair. So with fault, it's like, some people have asked us, can we just make the charger so reliable that it would never ever fault? And unfortunately, this is just not able to be done. So if you try and do that, you would make the charger so expensive that no one would be able to afford it. So what we've been trying to do is make sure that our customers put at least 2 chargers for every spot. So that way, if there is an issue, at least the other one will keep you going until we can get somebody there to repair it. So generally, I try and make sure that a station is diagnosed in the first 24 hours and we have an electrician on site in the next day. But that's not always possible, especially if I need to ship parts or they're not in a space that's close to a major city for transportation. And the last one I've got there is contingency planning and configuration. Sometimes they go together. So generally for contingency planning, we try and make sure that they have a unit close by that could be swapped out if necessary. This just helps to speed the process up. So if there's a fault, we can replace it quickly. But the configuration also comes into it because if it reports back and we can see that there's a fault, then we can know to have somebody out there before it has the fault. So these things work together. So we've been trying to make sure that more and more of the stations are networked and talking and not just individual islands where no one can tell you anything until it's actually faulted. I just chucked up a few pictures of vandalism here. So you see on the far left, that's one where someone just cut the cables off. We don't know why. There's not actually a lot of copper in these cables. I think they would have been very disappointed when they got there and found out they weren't going to get very much. Those cables cost like $2,000 each. So it's very unfortunate. The next one along is where it looks like someone has dropped the cable, and when they've dropped the cable, they've actually smashed the edge of the connector off. And unfortunately, there's up to 500 volts DC run through those pins. So this is where drivers help us, because if they see that, they can tell us. The only way we can know that remotely is when they would have plugged it into the station, the car would have done an isolation check, and then we would have seen it would have failed. The second from the right, that's where someone has bruised the cable after running it over. So again, that's another one where this one actually happened in Norway, and it had been dropped on the ground and it snowed on top. So the person who drove in didn't actually know it was there. It wasn't until they'd run it over and then pulled back and then realized what had happened. So it does happen a lot more than you'd think. And the last one on the right, that's where someone's actually reversed into it. So, and in this case, there was a bollard in front of it. They actually smashed the bollard backwards into the charger and then bent it backwards. And it still delivered power for about a month. No one actually reported that incident. So again, we rely on our drivers to help us inform us when things go wrong. So the next one I've got is OCPP services. So this is something that Tritium does not provide. So we have many partners who are much better experts in how to integrate with different vendors, with different credit card providers. So this is their domain. But we have found that some things are starting to change. So before, generally, so if it's a charge point charger, you went to charge point, they gave you a little card, or you used their app, and that's all you did, and you're kind of in that little ecosystem. But now there's a thing called e-roaming, And e-roaming provides its own kind of upsides and downsides. So an upside is you only have to be a member of one charging provider, and if the other station is a part of the e-roaming, you can just tag and then off you go. So that's what's happening in Europe. Like everyone's e-roaming, you just use the one tag and off you go. But one of the side effects is when you do that, the person who is e-roaming, their details are not available to that OCPP provider. So if they have an issue, they can't actually tell who it is or what car they have. So it can make things a little difficult, especially when you're trying to work out, like, maybe someone's damaged the cable and they're terminating sessions early, but they're trying to determine whether the cable's faulty or whether it's just a model of car causing the fault. So yeah, so that's been changing a lot. Also, vehicle identification. So right now, you can't identify a car. So the information, the identifying information we don't transmit, that's kept separate. So that information is changing again, but now there's going to be something called plug-in charge. It's coming in Europe. I don't know when it's coming to Australia, but when that comes, you won't need an RFID. All you need to do is just plug in your car and then it will chat to the station. The station will forward your information to a provider, and then that will tell the OCPP provider who you are and who to bill. So things should get much easier in the future, and you won't need apps and you won't need RFID cards. Just plug in, off you go. And another one is updates. So just as cars get updated, we update stations. We update station software all the time to make sure for new features or bugs or anything we find out. So we're changing our system so that when there's an update available, our OCPP providers can push that out by themselves quickly to make sure that we provide the best service to all of our customers. And my last one here is just the monitoring service. So generally this used to come from an OCPP provider, but it's changing now. So generally OCPP providers, they might do stuff for ABB and Tritium and FSX. So there's all these different people, and they don't want to customize their station software. They don't want to do any of that. So they just made theirs very generic. So now, like Tritium, we provide V4 Pulse. So it's a way of knowing how your stations are running. So we also do scans. So if we see a number of errors in a particular sequence, we may highlight that sequence and send that off to the provider and say, hey, we think your pumps are low because when a person starts charging, the temperature gets too high too quickly. Or we might see, we see that this person is always getting a 22. We think that they've got the aircon on their car, so we'll send a message off saying, please check these times these people may have been, they may have bought their car new, don't realise they need to turn their car off. Also, we use that for the fleet so you can quickly see. So we can also, it's not displayed on there, but we can bundle them in sites. So if you have 4 chargers on a site, if you lose one, it may go yellow. If you use 2, the site will go red. So that will indicate, hey, we need to get somebody there more quickly. So you may have 4 stations down in your network, but the one on the site that's gone red is automatically prioritized over another site that's still yellow or green. So that just helps us. Cool. That's all I have, but thanks very much for listening. Okay.